Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. So it's again the first Sunday of the month of October, and it's time for another talk about Gabriel Delanne and his work. Today we have Dr. Dan Assisi talking to us about the work Evidence for a Future Life. For those who don't know Dr. Assisi, he has lectured on spirituality and spiritism throughout the US and worldwide. He is a founding member of the Spiritist Institute and also the co-founder of the California Spiritist Association. He also hosts the Spiritist Conversations podcast. He's got a master's degree in public administration and a doctorate in education. This is just to say a few words about Dr. Assisi, who will be talking to us today. We have the pleasure of listening to his talk that is about evidence for a future life.
Hello, friends. This is Dan Assisi, and I am very excited to be here with you today, spending a couple of minutes talking about Gabriel Delanne, but more importantly about one of his works, Evidence for a Future Life. I just want to say how thrilled I am that the British Union for Spirit Societies has decided to create a series that is a homage to one of the early exponents of Spiritism, Gabriel Delanne. And I am very excited as well because I really appreciate this work, Evidence for a Future Life. It's one of his books, one of his few books that have been translated into English. And today, I will have the honor of talking with you for a little bit about the book. But here's what I find most challenging. I really can't speak to the entire book. It is a deep work, a result of deep thinking that I think is best served by your own investigation. So I have the difficult task of giving you an overview of the book without giving you any spoilers that would prevent you from reading the book, because I do think you should. This is a fantastic exploration of the evidence for the survival of the soul beyond the physical body and what it means to us, done in the 18th century. If you have followed the series from Bus, you would know that Gabriel Delanne, born François-Marie Gabriel Delanne, was born just a month or so before the publication of the Spirits book. His father was a friend of Kardec, and so young Gabriel would have frequented the circles of Kardec in the time and grew up exposed to the idea of the immortality of the soul and the tenets of Spiritism that would certainly influence his life and his work. But what I find most interesting about Delanne in general is that he brings his engineering background. He grew up to be an engineer, and in doing so, he has really brought this perspective to Spiritism that is complementary to the works of the philosopher Leon Denis and the other astronomer, with Gabriel Delanne and Leon Denis, Camille Flammarion. So I just want to tell you that I am excited about this work and that we have a chance to dive a little bit into it, but not too much, because I do wish for you to take some time reading the work itself, because it is a very worthwhile endeavor. I think we should start by saying that Evidence for a Future Life has a slightly different title in English than its original in French. In French, as you can see in the screen, L'âme est immortelle, démonstration expérimentale, and I pardon my French speakers. I am not a French speaker, so I probably just butchered that in French, but the point is that the original title is The Soul is Immortal, experimental demonstrations of that fact. And so nevertheless, the title in English, Evidence for a Future Life, still is a blessing because we do not have many of his books, unfortunately, translated into English. And this is one of those that we do have, so we cherish it very much. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But my point is that this book is fascinating in many different ways, and it will give you a quick run of its contents. But I should say that the whole idea of the book, in a roundabout way, really focuses on looking at the evidence that was available to Gabriel Delanne at that time and organizing in such a way as to make the case why is it possible for us to be certain scientifically that the soul exists. The way in which he does that is also very creative but very astute. He focused his investigations around the concept of the soul and its manifestation in the physical body through what we call the perispirit, the in-between between our soul and our physical bodies, the translator, the intermediary, because if he, as he argues, if we have a perispirit and we have a shape in the physical world and a shape that is maintained by a spirit, then it should be possible for us to search for that perispirit and see evidence of that in different manifestations, and science could therefore detect it. And he brings then the spirit away from the idea of an abstract concept that cannot be seen or felt or analyzed to something that we should endeavor to measure and find evidence of. And so this entire book is really an exploration of the evidence that was available to him at that time and makes for a great reading. It is very interesting and it's very well researched. And to this date, I still find it fascinating because even though we may have different terms and different wording that is perhaps not utilized today, because of course jargon and terms evolve with time, is still very powerful, because at the end of the day, he's talking about what we nowadays will call the non-locality of consciousness. That is to say, that if the soul really exists, and it does, and it has a shape and it outlives the physical body, so it will be possible for us to detect that and understand how it works, and that we would be able to experiment with this whole piece to prove that it's not just a theoretical concept and that it can be measured and experimented. So that's a very fascinating approach to science of the soul and how to do that. And the way he does that is also really well structured and pays homage to the thinking of Kardec and also witness to his own intellect. He breaks this book down into 3 different parts. The first one is called observation, and in it he really goes through the body of evidence he finds that exists at the time of the writing of this book, and through the research and thinking that he has done. The second part, which I find very spiritist in a way, is if there is theory about it, then it might be possible for us to experiment and replicate that theory. Because if one thing is true, then it can happen repeatedly in many different places. So he would then take a look not only of the theory that he covered on the first part of observation, he's going to look at the experiments, the experience of replicating that other researchers of his time had undertaken, and that is really great. And then he brings all that together in the last part of the book, which is called Spiritism and Science, which he then takes the theory and the observation and starts to create his own considerations about what that means to Spiritism and science in general, if we can indeed see that the spirit outlives the physical body and that we can measure the presence of the spirit through interactions with the perispirit. So it's a fascinating approach, a very structured approach, a very scientific approach, a very well-researched approach. You're going to find in every chapter many references to the people that he cites and to the topics that he addresses. So I think that for those of us who are curious about the science of the soul, this might be a great place to start, especially because it also gives us a historical perspective of the search. So really great. Again, I am going to try to not get myself carried away here and tell you about all the different cases, which is really hard to do in a short time because, again, he has done a really good job of giving us different examples from different sources about different possibilities. Right? So what I propose to do in the next couple of minutes, it really is to walk you through some of the structure of the book in hopes that you will find yourself curious about the whole book and then pick it up to read. So let's do that. Well, as I said, the book is divided in 3 parts. And the first part is structured in a very interesting way. He starts the first part, again, which is called Observations, by analyzing ancient beliefs and making a point that in different cultures of the past, we have always had a belief in the existence and the survivability of the soul. He goes to make the points and highlights different cultures and their beliefs, which is a fascinating starting point for us to see that this is not an invention of spiritists or spiritualists, that these core beliefs have existed throughout history and time, which means that if one thing is true, it will be repeated in many places. So in a way, he brings us a certain sense of reliability that's there. After he does this brief investigation, we find in chapter 2 the study of the soul by means of magnetism, which is what he says. And in it, he starts to investigate the evidence for the communications of the spirit through what was called at the time somnambulists. And somnambulists were people who were induced to a trance, to a mediumistic trance, by magnetizers. Magnetizers would then literally put their hands on the mediums and through hypnosis and magnetism induce these somnambulists, these mediums, into a trance. And in that trance process, they would be able then to have spirit communications, perform mediumistic phenomena, and so forth. And the chapter is full of different examples of the existence of the soul via experiments that were done through magnetizers impacting somnambulists and so forth. And if that was chapter 2, it also makes sense that he would then proceed to chapter 3 by describing the experience of mediums and spirits with the existence of the spirit. That is to say, it makes sense to me and rationally that he first analyzed the evidence for the existence of the pair spirit through magnetizers influencing the somnambulists, and then the next step is the mediums themselves, which really dispense with the need of magnetizers. So with mediums, you no longer need a magnetizer to influence the somnambulist, the medium, to have that trance. The medium is able to go into the trance, him or herself. And so they in this chapter investigate the possibility that we can detect and see the pair spirit, the physical organization of our spirit through that piece. And it's fascinating, many different examples, physical effects, especially some of the times, such as spirit molds, whereupon there will be a mold of wax and the spirit would materialize and place, for instance, their hand into a mold of wax. And after the spirit vanished, the mold of wax would maintain the form of the arm or the hand of that spirit, proving that indeed the spirit could hold a shape, and that indicates that we had the pair spirit, and that does meant that the spirit was not something abstract that could not be measured or seen or felt, but that it really did hold a form, a model created by the pair spirit, which led us to believe that the spirit could indeed live outside the physical body, thus evidence for future life. Very fascinating piece in general. And then he goes into chapter 4, and I know that I might be going fast here, but I don't really want to spend so much time into each chapter and rob you of the pleasure of reading and finding the different cases. But in chapter 4, he talks about the double, and this idea of the possibility that some people were able to project their souls or have an out-of-body experience, so to say, their double, that could be seen in a different part of the city or even of the globe by different people. And so this is a fascinating possibility that exists, and he cites a couple of cases by different people that have witnessed or had other people witness the etheric double of somebody who is physically in one place, but for instance during sleep can also be seen in a different part of the world by other people who independently vouch for the presence of that person. So not only an apparition itself, but also sometimes a physical one. And I think reading about that is a great reminder of the possibilities of the spirit, even for those of us who have already been convinced, or at least satisfied, that the survivability of the soul and that the fact that the soul can live outside the physical body is a reality. And so again, in this first part of the book, which he wraps up with chapter 5, really is about organizing the theories in place. And he really talks about the psychic organization after death. That is to say, hey, if all these things are possible, what kind of shape and how are we to find ourselves after death that is outside of the physical body? He connects these dots about the fact that if we can't measure the presence of the spirit through the perispirit outside the physical body, then it also holds true that once we are completely outside of the physical body, not temporarily but permanently with physical death, it should also be possible for us to detect the presence of the spirit and carry on with the same experiments, which indeed is true. The point here is that he does a really great job of synthesizing existing research at the time to put together all these different ideas, concatenating them, connecting them in such a way that makes for interesting reading, but also makes a solid argument about the fact that the spirit can indeed live outside the physical body, and that it's not an abstract thing that cannot be understood or measured, and that it's something that's just beyond concept. It's also there, right? Okay, so for part 2, we really see his great mind at work because he makes, again, as I mentioned before, the really powerful argument that there is theory and there is observation and things that we can hear of and conjecture about. But it should also be possible for us to replicate those concepts if they are indeed true. And so here in the second part, he talks about all the different kinds of experiments that were done by people close to him or that he knew of about these specific pieces. For instance, chapter 6 in part 2, experience, chapter 6 is called Psychic Experiments, and he goes back to the idea of the double continued, right? Is it possible then to have evidence of the fact that people could exist outside their physical body and be seen by different people? He tells us different tales, for instance, of a man who, while he was asleep, was seen in a different city knocking in the door of somebody they knew, asked for a drink of water, and then left. And people were puzzled why he had come in late at that night, asked for a drink of water, and puzzled. So the lady who lived in that city wrote him a letter asking him about that, and he asked her not to tell that to his servants because he decided to go then and travel into that city later on, and the servants who did not know him recognized him from the moment that he had come in from drinking a cup of water, which is to say, his physical form, his spirit was made material, and these people he had never met had seen him do that, and when he returned to the house, even though he had never talked to them before, they recognized him from doing that. So it's a fascinating story, for instance, amidst other different ones in there. Chapter 7, he goes and spends some time telling us about other great researchers and the experiments they conducted themselves. He tells us about Monsieur de Rochat and Dr. Louise as well, and all the different things that they have done, which is fascinating. And chapter 8 also brings us to spirit photography. And this idea of, I guess we could call instrumental transcommunication nowadays, where we can take evidence of spirit interactions with photography plates, so to say, at that time and today with modern cameras, that because the spirit, through the perispirit, could have some weight and some shape, it could be detected. And he shares with us some early experiments on catching that on the photography side. Fascinating work, I think. Fascinating work in general that warrants our exploration and our overall perception of how things take place. All right, so that's part 2. And then in part 3 of his book, this is really, he brings everything together. He gets the ideas, he gets the experiments, and he really starts to think about what's next and what is it that can be done and can be understood. And in it, he shares, for instance, in chapter 9, a study of the spirit. If we have all these theories and all these experiments to point to it, he starts to make conjectures about, so what is the spirit made of? How does it work? How to operate into the world? And he drives us further into his thinking in chapter 10 by talking about space, time, and primordial matter. What is the matter that composes things in the universe? It's a fascinating essay about different things in general, but that really leads us to think about the nature of reality. And chapter 11, the last part of this third piece of the book, it's about the psychic planes and modes of energy. Again, satisfied that we are at this point in time, that we have reached the certainty that the soul can outlive the physical body and can in fact be detected while it's in the body and ventures outside, and after it sheds its mortal coil, as Shakespeare would tell us. He talks a little bit about how that could work. I know that I've been talking about a lot, and we have been covering many different things. But I think that the important piece here is to share with you how visionary and how fascinating this work is. Because as a matter of fact, when he brings things together in his conclusion, he really takes the whole scientific piece and brings it to a practicality and to an approach that makes sense to us. Because at the end of the day, as he makes the case, the idea that we can perceive the perispirit, this semi-material body, this interpreter between the spirit and the physical body, and we can measure it, means that we have yet another scientific proof of the existence of the soul. And the consequences of that, and that is, I think, what interests most of us at the end of the day, are great. Here, in the final pieces of the work, he shares with us a couple of really interesting thoughts that I want to highlight with you because I think that they are worth our time. He says in the conclusion that the psychic condition of man, that is our psychic or spiritual piece, has long remained hypothetical because the means for investigating the subject have been lacking. Just as other sciences were unable to make considerable advance until the invention placed at their command, such as the microscope, the telescope, the spectroscope, photography. Similarly, the discovery of the hypnotic and mediumistic states of being has made it possible to study the psychic condition to a certain extent disengaged from the corporeal. And I think this is why Gabriel Delanne's work is so interesting, because it comes at such a pivotal time in our history, our collective history, but also in our spiritual history. As we begin to develop the thinking and the way in which we can really detect the impact of and the presence of the spirits, we begin to formalize a way of thinking that could not have happened before. Science has reached such a level that gave us the tools to investigate and really measure and detect all these things that we're talking about. And that parallel that he makes about how science advanced after the invention of the instruments like the microscope. After the microscope was created, our scientific knowledge about living organisms and the micro level had increased tremendously. That parallel can be made also to our understanding of spirituality. And I think that is what makes Spiritism such a fascinating body of knowledge that captivates our hearts and souls. Because with Spiritism and the study of mediumship that has been undertaken by Spiritism in this past 160 plus years, we have been able to focus and hone our understanding of the interaction between the two realms of life, the physical and the spiritual. Until the publication of the Medium's book, there was no organized treatise on how to understand mediumship. Even though mediumship has lived forever in our history, has been there since the beginning, it had been the domain of a chosen few. But with Spiritism, Allan Kardec democratizes the study of mediumship and makes it possible for us to understand how the two worlds interact and what that means to our existence. And in his own way, Delanne brings us back to the evidence that life exists, and in doing so, he is able to confirm that which we knew and that we have been told by Spiritism and by many other religions before, that life goes on after the death of the physical body, And that what specifically Spiritism is really great at is to tell us how that works and what that could look like. So I think that Delanne's work, it is really visionary and revolutionary in many different ways, because it points to this new era that Spiritism helps to usher in, wherein we can get scientific concepts and bring them together with these old beliefs that we have held throughout history, that there is indeed the survivability of the soul, and that these things are not separate from each other, that they can benefit from each other, and that understanding that our beliefs can also be supported by sound scientific evidence is a momentous occasion in our history. We no longer need to keep science and religion apart. We can see them as different facets to the same thinking and pathways to arrive at greater knowledge that will impact us in such a way as to transform our understanding of our lives. And he does a marvelous job concluding his book and keeping that higher perspective in mind. And there is a beautiful quote that I would like to share with you. In it, he says, "These consoling verities, that is, these truths that come up through science, open up to the mind a marvelous vista of progressive life and lead to the conviction that for all beings there exists one origin and one destiny. If these truths are sown broadcast, they will inaugurate a new departure in moral and spiritual evolution, which must finally culminate in the realization of true brotherhood and the regeneration of humanity." That is to say, my friend, that as we make space in our minds and hearts for these truths that we can feel, but we can also verify through science, it ought to lead us to the understanding of the immortality of the soul. And when we do that, we see how life can be progressive. That is to say, we know that we are not going to end with our physical body, and in fact, we are going to be exposed and come into the certainty that we reincarnate as many times as necessary by the grace of God to continue to learn. And when that takes place, we get to this conviction that not only us, but everyone we love continues to evolve, that we all have come from God, and that we will all go towards perfection. And that changes our behavior, or at least has the potential to severely impact us and change our behaviors. Because once we understand that we are immortal beings under progression, and that our neighbors are also going through the same process, we can become more tolerant with self and others. We can see that what really matters is not what we have in the physical world, but that we are learning here to take with us from beyond. And if we can make these certainties broadcast, common throughout the world, it will really create a new way of thinking that will revolutionize how we see life and greatly speed up our spiritual progress here on earth. And that will lead us to an incredible realization, as he says, that we are all connected, that we are all brothers and sisters because we are children of God, and as such, we are heirs to everything, because if we are children of God, we will inherit everything that God has created, and as such, we are the keepers not only of our planet, but of each other. And these bonds of love and fraternity that will come from that connection can be extremely powerful if only we're able to understand, not only with our hearts but also with our minds, that everything is pointing to this idea that we can learn more and see that science and religion are not opposed, but in fact they can work in tandem to the creation of this awareness of the physical world and of the spiritual world that will lead us to these incredible transformations. So we hope that you will take some time, if you can, to read this wonderful book, Evidence for a Future Life by François-Marie Gabriel Delanne, who really brings to us the origins of the scientific search for meaning and understanding about the immortality of the soul. And it is a fascinating read, not only for those who want to understand a little bit of the thinking, but who also may have a special fondness in their heart for the history of spirituality, the history of Spiritism, and how it happened. Again, Delanne, along with Léon Denis, Camille Flammarion, were really, was really one of the three that led the efforts of Kardec forward after Kardec left us. And it is really great to see that we have his scientific thinking represented. In fact, we are honored to share with you here that in the coming months, so by early 2024, we are going to be republishing this work in English to make it accessible to those who have not had a chance to read it yet. It is hard to find a copy of this book. It is no longer in print. So I'm happy to share that the Spiritist Institute, of which I'm part of, has worked hard to gather the original copy of the translation into English, and we're cleaning it up, and we'll make this available in each ebook and also paperback and hardcover for those who want, because we think that it's very important for us to honor our present by understanding how we got here from a Spiritist perspective, and that has to be by paying homage to people like Gabriel Delanne, who no doubt continue his work in the beyond of connecting science to the understanding of the Spirit. And it is our sincere hope that you too may find that connection in your soul, that you may strengthen your understanding of science and spirituality by reading this book, and thus making your beliefs even more rooted in certainty and science and understanding and rationality, so that you can take a leap forward in your life. So thank you for spending some time with us. I hope that you feel curious about the book, and that you have perhaps it added to your list of things to do. And we hope that we may continue to enjoy the joys of the work of Gabriel Delanne, which you can also get to know a little bit on your own or by watching the other videos in the series. Again, I am Dan Assisi, and I am honored to have spent a couple of minutes sharing with you my perceptions on Gabriel Delanne's evidence for a future life. I hope that you have a great day and a great life.
So we have no words to thank Dan Assisi for this wonderful talk, for the time he spent. We know he's got a very busy agenda. He's just returned from the UK, where he spent some time, working for Spiritism, giving talks, taking part in events there. And as soon as he returned a few days ago, he had also a very busy agenda in the United States. So we are very, very thankful for the time he allocated to us to give us this gift of his brilliant talk about this wonderful work. And I'm delighted to know that the book is going to be published again in English, by early next year. So thank you so much for your time. We know it's very, very precious. We are really delighted with that. I want to say hello to Elsa Rossi, to Fabrizio from the Spiritist Society of Bournemouth, to Sandra Jimenez, who've been with us and said hello to us, and all those who are watching us in this, yet another talk about Gabriel Delanne and his wonderful work. It's always brilliant to get to know, to have some ideas about, the books he published and the work he did, which, as Dan Assisi just said, was actually, taking Kardec's work to the next step, together with Léon Denis and Camille Flammarion and some others as well. And before we go, I'll just make some announcements. So next month, the 5th of November, first Sunday of the month, we'll have Dr. Shani Martin with us, and she will be talking about yet another book by Gabriel Delanne. So don't miss it. Next month, the first Sunday of the month, the 5th of November. So we'll have Dr. Martin with us. And then in December, we will have actually a gathering of all the speakers. We'll have a moment of all of them together to be talking about the work and exchanging some impressions about Gabriel Delanne and his wonderful work. We also hold studies. The Spiritist Center for Peace holds studies every Wednesday, 12 o'clock noon UK time. It's a study about the book Heaven and Hell and the Gospel according to Spiritism. So everyone is welcome to join. It's a wonderful opportunity to study this book, Heaven and Hell, and also get some, inspiration and guidance from the Gospel according to Spiritism. We also have a course on Saturdays, a study group, an online course on the Mediums book is coordinated by Guilherme Dias, Charles Kempf, and myself. So 10:30 UK time. Every Saturday we have this study. It's a study, it's not a series of talks. So everyone has the opportunity to ask questions, to express their opinions about the book. So it's really nice. And also, it's never enough to thank the Kardec Radio for letting us use their studio and offer to you this series about Gabriel Delanne. So, heartfelt thanks to Kardec Radio and especially to Dr. Anceloni, who is the person with whom we, talk directly and ask for permission to use this studio. So that's what we had for today, and hope to see you all next month, 5th of November, same time, 7 p.m. UK time, for another talk about Gabriel Delanne and his beautiful work. So bye-bye for now. See you soon.